Next fact, the immediate proclamation in Jerusalem. The majority of scholars cannot deny that the resurrection was first preached in Jerusalem. All the evidence leads to Jerusalem as being the home base and happening very early on, such as the development of early Christian creeds and how all the sources suggest Jerusalem is where Christianity began. Tacitus mentions off the cuff that Christianity began in Judea and spread from there. In one of Paul's early epistles, he mentions off the cuff that the apostles are still preaching in Jerusalem. Now, why does this matter? Well, when we look at the importance of time, and when you proclaim a miracle, that fact can make a serious impact. As James Sarin said, the apostles proclaimed the resurrection at Pentecost, when Jerusalem expected the spread of the report and endeavored to prevent it, while the eyes of their enemies were yet sparkling with rage and madness, while Calvary was yet dyed with the blood they had spilt there. Do impostors take such measures? Would they not have waited till the fury of the Jews had been appeased, till judges and public officers had been changed, and till people had been less attentive to their dispositions? If the evidence was not in their favor, it would have made sense for the early church to go elsewhere, as cults often do. Cult leaders round up their followers and take them away from civilization, or to a different area from the place where you can be disproven. Even with Mormonism, Joseph Smith led his people away from New York. But the disciples walked right up to the Sanhedrin and said, "You crucified your Messiah, and he has been raised." Now these people are either crazy or they are absolutely convinced they are right. So the conspiracy theory has no hope of explaining this. If you're an imposter, you go off to Spain or India and proclaim your miracle. Not in Jerusalem, where they have the evidence, the motive, and the means to debunk you. Since we know the resurrection was proclaimed early on, and it was in Jerusalem, it is hard to say that the mythic theory can explain this either. This was not something we can say was developed later if the creed in 1 Corinthians 15 is roughly dated to within 3 years of Pentecost. That means there were Christians right there in Jerusalem developing this, which set a foundational belief for Christians to be able to memorize. So there is no reason to think it was developed later on, or far off elsewhere. So the mythic theory cannot explain this fact either. But what about the hallucination theory? Well, if all we have to go on is this fact, I suppose a miraculous hallucination could convince the disciples to preach the resurrection immediately in Jerusalem. But it is still doubtful because hallucinations or visions don't really imply a physical resurrection, or do they fit with group hallucinations, as we discussed earlier. But it is possible if all we have is this fact alone. So just in case we miss something, we'll allow this one to pass. But the resurrection theory explains this with the most ease, because if Jesus was resurrected, of course the disciples had the boldness to proclaim the resurrection. God would have been on their side, and all the evidence would have been in their favor.